Does 4x4 or four-wheel drive make sense? That's what we're going to be talking about in this week's episode of Deep Drive, brought to you by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Now, what we're going to be talking about is the demand for 4x4, the market for 4x4. Should manufacturers really be investing in 4x4 technology? I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And indeed, in fact, if you look at the news very recently, let's say this week itself, we've had the Sierra, which launched with QWD. In fact, that was the main focus of the Sierra Electric, the all-wheel drive, or as they call the quad-wheel drive. Their marketing terminology for it. We've had other mid-size SUVs like the Victoris also had their AWD. We know, of course, Mahindra has four-wheel drive as well. You would think there seems to be like a resurgence maybe in this, but does it really make sense? And that's what we want to discuss.
Yeah, right? That's right. I think really, obviously, let's talk about the Sierra.
Right.
Bragging rights, that's what it was, the car going over the dune.
Right.
And I think for a lot of brands, having 4x4 is a bit of that halo image.
Statement
shows the capability of the car. That's what it comes in for. And, specifically on Tata Motors, frankly, until the electrics came along, they really didn't have 4x4. They lost it. I mean, the last hardcore four-wheel drive was the Tata Safari, the original Safari.
Right.
They brought back the Safari, but it only came with two-wheel drive. It was technically difficult to do it. But here, they have managed to do four-wheel drive. And the sense I get is that because they lost out on that four-wheel drive halo to Mahindra, which is really, to me, a brand that kind of is identified with 4x4 more than any other brand, which we'll come to later. But Mahindra doesn't have 4x4 all-wheel drive in the electric range.
Yes.
And I think that's where Tata really want to make a point that, we do have it.
Right.
And this is what the cars are capable of. So I think the whole thing was around the four-wheel drive capability. But frankly, to customers, does that really matter? I think probably not. They buy it for different reasons. I think 4x4 is not about utility. It's not about capability. It's about identity. And I think that's what customers, look at it for. Of course, you've got the real hardcore guys, very, very niche.
Right.
And that builds a community, that builds a brand, and that kind of has an overall halo effect on the brand. So I think, Sergius, maybe, we can just dive into a bit of what 4x4 is. We have a history of them.
Right.
Again, Mahindra is, kind of, let's say, pioneer of 4x4s in India with 80-year-old legacy coming from the Jeep, which now Jeep is back here.
Right.
So Mahindra always has had that legacy, but we've had other kind of brands which have come in also try and make a 4x4 statement.
Yeah,
and I think Jeep being one of them, of course, as well. I think, Sergius, I think the total Jeep car park or vehicle park right now, all the vehicles they've sold, I believe over 50% of them are 4x4s
in India.
In India, that's right. Yeah, in India.
Yeah, I think it goes with the brand. Jeep, and we know it's a rule for Jeep. They cannot launch a car without a four-wheel drive.
That's right. And I think that's a very good point. And I think it's because of that very, let's say, part of their DNA that every model line has to have a 4x4 variant, which is literally ingrained in the company's DNA or brand book or whatever.
Right.
They couldn't develop, would have been logical to do, a Jeep on the Citroen CQ platform. Right. Because that was a platform designed only for front-wheel drive, a 3-cylinder petrol engine. So Jeep, typically it would have, given them instantly a sub 4-meter Jeep if they could use the Citroen platform. But it's just because there was no 4x4 capability on that platform, they couldn't use it. And now we know you're using the Tata Argos platform for Jeep. And who knows, for EVs, they might bring something from China. It could possibly even be Dongfeng to look at, Jeep electrics. But Jeep, classic example of a brand synonymous with the 4x4, and they have it.
Yeah, and I think, Hormazd, it's a very smart strategy. They have lost out, yes. But I think from a marketing point of view, it's really bang on, like you said. It's not about capability, it's about identity. And they're just reinforcing that identity, saying that if it's a Jeep, it's got capability. It's not a dressed up SUV.
Yeah.
It's of course they do have options in terms of different types of four-wheel drive systems that they do offer. We know they have e-axles as well, like electric rear.
That's right. Which could
combustion.
work on a hybrid.
Exactly. But in some form or the other, they would have an all-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive system. And maybe it's a good time to actually discuss the different types of, all-wheel drive systems. I mean, the various ways you can cut them up, part-time, full-time four-wheel drive, things like that. But I mean, I like to typically maybe classify it as, automatic systems. So you have systems where you don't do anything. It comes in and out automatically. You've got your Audi Quattros, which is a good example of that.
In fact, I think the Quattro has been a great kind of, let's say, marketing platform for Audi. The legacy all the way back to the Audi Quattro rally cars.
Rally cars, yeah.
So really, there's a huge halo around that. And from what I understand, Audi is using that as a competitive edge in India. I mean, they're not doing very well right now. But, for lack of having modern products, they are giving the Q range. All of them are Quattro. So that's quite something. I mean, you've got Mercedes and BMW, which are front-wheel drive purely, but Audi is Quattro.
Yeah, you do have some variants which do offer, but yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, with Audi, it's like all of them.
Yeah, that's right. I'm saying you have an option of a four-wheel drive in the entire Q range. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
I was just talking to the Audi guys. They say that is seen as something to have. Their customers value that tech. All their cars are a bit dated right now. So this is one kind of unique tech which they have over the others, which they're trying to leverage. Whether it works, doesn't work, but clearly it's used as a very, very strong, let's say, marketing cred. With manufacturers using it for, let's say consumers, even though the offtake is generally very small if there is an option of 4x4 and 4x2.
Yes, and in fact, Hormazd, if you look at Audi, even the supercars, the R8, when we had, that was a Quattro system too. And of course, for different reasons. I mean, there it was all about traction, putting the power down, cornering grip, wet grip as well. But it's another use case for all-wheel drive tech. Right?
Yeah, supercars, a lot of supercars have them. I think the Lamborghinis,
Today, the entire range of Lamborghini is actually, weirdly enough, all-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive, yeah, that's right.
Your Revuelto, Temerario.
Yeah, correct. And again, I think it's a lot of electronics. Clearly, the way the torque can be split between front and rear depending on the situation. I think all of these are rear biased, of course, because that's really what sports cars need to be. So I think maybe unlike some of the Quattro SUVs, which are front wheel biased. But absolutely right. So I think even Porsche have four-wheel drive, Ferrari has four-wheel drive, all of them do. I think after you start producing these insane levels of power, especially with the hybrids, I think just four-wheel drive feels the safest.
You have to. I mean, the Luce, another good example, 4 motors. It's not just four-wheel drive.
That's right.
They're using 4 motors, so there's one in each.
Yeah, the case for electrics is much easier, which we'll come to later. But I mean, I don't know, personally, I think a four-wheel drive supercar, I think it takes a little bit of the purity out of it.
From the steering feel?
Definitely. I'm convinced of that because I drove the Ferrari 849, the Testarossa.
Right.
And a 296. And I can tell you the purity of steering of the 296, it just felt so much better. 849, however good, a phenomenal car, but a little bit of the tractive forces do filter through. And honestly, if I have a sports car, I would for me, it's just rear wheel drive, just leaving the front as, let's say, unsullied or no influence of any amount of tractive forces, because you might get a little bit of that torque steer or some kind of, let's say, feedback coming from the axles, the front axles.
Yeah, and I mean, staying with the same concept almost of using, all-wheel drive for on-road performance kind of things. You have it on, the mass segment as well. I mean, you look at, let's say here, Maruti Suzuki. You have that in the Victoris, right? The AWD, what they call select, actually, weirdly enough, because you can select the system. It does it automatically, but you can also select if you want it, need to be locked into a particular mode. So that's an example there. You've got it in other, in fact, Suzuki even has it in the Ignis and the Swift. We don't get it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a much simpler system. You can't select it.
Don't forget, Suzuki has had,
History of right.
rallying. It's there in its DNA. They've got a bit of that.
Exactly.
And don't forget, you've got the Jimny, where the 4x4
Yes, which is the
DNA
other
really
one,
comes
yeah.
from. But very interesting in the Victoris. I think I remember going for the launch, and, they had this pit dug to show with the axle
Right.
twisting, and how the car would manage to kind of
Switches the-
plow
yeah.
through with the all-wheel drive. So again, an all-wheel drive used then as a technology statement, but I think in terms of demand, from what I understand, I think Victoris would be even less than 1%. The AWD on the Victoris would be even less than 1%.
Yeah, single digit at best, 1-2%.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I think it goes with
The brands.
the brand.
Yeah,
exactly.
correct.
It goes with the brand kind of image. You're not expecting that from a Maruti, so buyers
Correct. Yeah,
aren't
he's
going-
more mass market, more traditional, and clearly, I think obviously when you have almost 40% CNG of the Victoris, I don't think that person is going to be wanting all-wheel drive. So clearly, it's there. So on the other hand, you've got something like a 7XO,
right.
which again has a similar system.
Similar system, yeah.
And that, from what I understand, is about 3% of sales. So clearly,
Still low, but little better.
I think that's coming to the point where I want to talk about Mahindra, because clearly I think they have identified with four-wheel drive, I think, better than any other brand. I mean, it owns the four-wheel drive space. And I think its icons are built on four-wheel drive capability, whether it's a Scorpio, whether it's the Thar.
Thar, of course.
It's all about four-wheel drive. I mean, from what I understand, this Thar has quite a high proportion of four-wheel drive, that
It is. I mean, on the rocks, Hormazd, it's about 25%, four-wheel drive. On the Thar 2-door, it does drop, but that's also because they have, the 1.5,
correct,
which gets the tax break and things like that.
Right,
But
I believe on the 2.2, the diesel variants, just the diesel, because it goes well with diesel, I think it's almost 50%.
Right.
So that's amazing. So clearly, I think Mahindra has really owned the 4x4 space, and with good reason, because again, let's get into hardcore 4x4s.
Right.
Where you have the transfer case,
Right.
low ratio.
Low ratio.
Exactly.
You have
locking dips.
Yeah, and some of them you have a center differential as well.
That's
lock.
right. Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, Hormazd, that's very interesting. Two things you mentioned: low ratio and center differentials. In fact, a lot of people keep asking us about this tech. In cars like the Jimny, the Thar Rocks, even the Force Gurkha, hardcore 4x4s for sure.
Correct.
You've
All with
got,
low ratios.
With low ratio, so you can crawl through, sand, loose stuff, and things like that.
The transfer box.
Yes, but you don't have a center differential. Now, actually, the center differential is really something that you need for using four-wheel drive when you're at higher speeds. As we know, a differential, separates or rather can make one wheel move at a different speed. So when you're taking a turn, at high speeds, when you're doing that, the front axle and the rear axle
at different speeds.
Yeah, they're also at different speeds, right? Smaller difference, right? So the front left and the rear left, there'll be a smaller difference. And a good way of proving this point is if you drive a car in a circle on the sand, you'll find there are 4 different tracks, not 2.
Yeah.
Because the front and the rear wheels don't follow each other. They all have their own different paths, So I think in the owner's manual, in the Jimny and the Thar, there is in fact a warning that says don't use 4 high on dry, hard surfaces above certain speeds. I think some brands specify at around 60 kilometers per hour. And that's really to avoid what you call a binding, of the front and the rear axle.
Right.
So
on a loose surface, there's enough slip.
There's enough of slip. Exactly. There's enough of slip. Even in these Audi systems we just discussed, because they are electronically, activated, you can allow for some slip in a multi-plate clutch, but you can't do that with these. So really, I would say in terms of the hardest core off-roader, let's say a G-Wagon,
or even a Defender.
Or a Defender, you have a center differential, so you can use it on road.
Yeah, you can lock it also.
Exactly. You can lock it then when you're going off-road. So 50-50 split front and rear.
Right.
And then the rear diffs can also be locked. In fact, the G-Wagon, the most iconic, those 3 buttons.
That's right.
Where you can lock all 3. So that's really the ultimate expression. Comes at a cost, obviously.
Correct.
Because you have that center differential.
Correct.
But I mean, even on a Thar or a Jimny, without the center diff, the capability is still there because of the low ratio.
That's right.
You still have the low range where the torque is multiplied even further. So that's really the difference in these systems.
Yeah. And I think, I want to talk about community because clearly
Off-road
I
communities,
think
yes.
off-road communities, I think they are built on good old body on frame,
Right.
4x4, hardcore 4x4, with transfer cases, with, low ratios.
Low ratios.
Obviously, no all-wheel drive is going to get into this terrain, it's there. So I think, it's from a community standpoint, it's quite interesting. Again, Thar has a huge community. Mahindra has a huge community, with the off-roading community. When you go onto any off-road meet, a lot of Mahindras there as well. I think the Jimny, very, very interesting, is that I think that clamor for the Jimny and, all that it could do as a little car that could punch above its weight, phenomenally capable off-road. Despite that 1.5 engine, phenomenally capable off-road. But again, as a mainstream car, it didn't do well at all. It sometimes leads me to think, did Maruti misjudge the customer over there? Yeah, maybe the mass customer, what I feel, not interested in the 4x4 capability, more interested in it as a style statement. Could have been positioned
Identity,
to that.
as you said, exactly, the
Yeah.
image.
Yeah, more on image, which maybe, they couldn't deliver on that. So, so again, I think though there is a strong 4x4 community, that doesn't necessarily translate into great
Sales
sales.
for this, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And Hormazd, we also have to talk about the Jeep Compass. I do want to talk about this because it's a very interesting sort of setup because it's got low ratio. It's actually what you'd theoretically call an all-wheel drive system. Front bias, right, locks the rear when required. Doesn't have a transfer case,
Yeah.
right? But within the gearbox, it has the first gear, which is a very sort of tall, yeah, exactly, large ratio. And so when you're driving in normal terrain, it actually starts off in second gear.
Yeah, that's right.
When you engage for low, it uses that first gear. So I think they very cleverly set that up.
Yeah, that's right.
Avoided a sort of complexity and cost of a transfer case.
Yeah.
But within the gearbox had this first.
But again, Compass, a very interesting case of, in a way, 4x4 limited its sales because, you couldn't get a diesel automatic for a long time if you didn't have 4x4.
If you didn't have 4x4, yes.
So everyone who wanted a diesel auto, and at that time, diesel was in the heyday when Jeep was there, they had to buy the 4x4. And no one wanted it, but they had to have that extra cost. Jeep never had a 4x2 diesel auto in its lineup. They just didn't have it because, so they had to develop one specifically for the Indian market, which took time. And I think that came out a couple of years back, quite late, but too little, too late. So clearly, I think, in a way, sometimes when you foist 4x4, everyone doesn't want it, which is very, very clear. They would rather have the, let's say, a 4x2 option. But really, it's the imagery which is what is built with the 4x4, and that's very clear. I mean, we're looking at, let's say, the percentages. Very, very minuscule. I don't know what the overall 4x4, let's say, percentages, taking all the brands. Obviously, be less than 1% because there's so many mass market brands which don't have 4x4. I'm just saying from the SUVs itself. But, Jeep, so particular about its 4x4 credentials. But sometimes, it doesn't always turn into, let's say, enhancing the appeal and, making people buy a 4x2 variant.
So, yeah, I mean, Hormazd, this, of course, isn't to say, and to our viewers, this isn't to say that you don't need a 4x4. Obviously, if you are, like you said, one part of the community and you're a off-roader, you want to go off-road, you've got to have 4x4. There are various choices out there. But even if you aren't going off-road, there are a few use cases where an all-wheel drive would help. For example, in the hills, a lot of people who live in the hilly areas like that because you get better traction. They want the traction at all four wheels. Sometimes a front-wheel drive doesn't help. Like we know the Marazzo, for example, very famously, a lot of consumers kept saying that it's not great in the hills because front-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you want that where the traction is, the weight shifts on the rear. You want the traction there. And so that's an example. If you live in areas, snowy areas, very often wet and, things like that, an all-wheel drive can help.
Yeah, it can help. But, again, you can turn the whole thing on its head when you see that the most popular budget car in the hills is the Alto. Front wheel drive, light,
Right.
you know,
Light in the narrow,
yeah,
yes.
exactly. No,
Lord Alto as
but
we
coming
calls
back,
it,
yeah, I think all-wheel drive. I think very few people say yes, I want all-wheel drive. I think it's if it's there, it's nice to have. Though, as I said, Audi, says that its customers value that. Obviously, the people who want four-wheel drive are the off-roaders.
Yes.
Who have a passion for off-roading, and off-roading is great actually. I mean, you can scare yourself at walking speeds, depending on
Correct.
how steep the
Right.
incline or drop is. But again, going off-roading is very, very limited in India. I mean, largely because it's illegal in most places
parts.
because you're going into forests. We are not supposed to be going onto trails. You're not supposed to be going. So really, it's restricted largely to private land. And of course, that has its limitations. So again, 4x4 hasn't taken off the way it has in, let's say, the West. But still, there's a lovely, thriving community. I've been for quite a few off-road events. Our good friend Tejas does an outstanding job, learn off-road. And he's got, his courses are pretty packed and full up.
Right.
But again, that's still small. If you take the overall vehicle market and, let's say what people are interested in, clearly 4x4 is still very, very niche. But again, I think the trade-offs are there, which normal customers don't want. One is the cost. It's obviously more expensive. One is more complexity. You've got to hold, another driveline, another driven axle. Then, of course, is the weight. And with that comes fuel efficiency penalty, with the drag also, with the additional driven wheels. So net, I think people would be better off with a 4x2. But I think in EVs, much easier to do. And I think EV 4x4s, a lot of people are doing that and going ahead with that.
In fact, Hormazd, you're absolutely right, because if you look at the percentage, we were just discussing the offtake. If you look at electric 4x4s, all brands say that it's an easier sell and more consumers opt for it. In fact, even Tata, oddly enough, when the Harrier launched, the QWD or their all-wheel drive version went up to 30%, and right now it's settled at around 9 and 10%, which is higher than the, let's say, 7XO, which is an ICE-based, internal combustion-based vehicle.
Yeah.
And I think that's, a lot to do with the fact that the penalties you just spoke of, some of them are sort of minimized here. Let's say the fuel economy penalty. Yes, there is a range drop, but you don't feel that because it's electricity. You're not paying, as high a price.
Yeah.
So you don't feel the pinch with the drop in efficiency. Complexity, it's a little less complex in the sense that you've got motors front and rear.
It's far less complex. I
Exactly.
think you can do your torque vectoring. You don't have and propeller shaft. All that packaging issues are not there. So clearly, I mean, much easier to do.
Exactly.
But though, it's interesting, though an electric 4x4 is easier to engineer and, put out. I mean, classic case is Harrier.
Right.
Because, I mean, let's go back. Why didn't Harrier can't have an ICE 4x4? It's the platform is a Land Rover platform. Now, if they use a Land Rover engine, they could have. But they've got a Fiat engine, and the packaging of that and the output shaft doesn't align with the transmission tunnel. So you can't have it. If they used the let's say a Land Rover engine, it's designed for that. They could have, but that engine, it's too expensive.
Course,
they couldn't. So clearly, everyone talked of, can we have a 4x4 Safari and Harrier? We knew it was not coming. It's just not technically feasible. But they could easily do it with the electric, because there's no problem of that prop shaft, and transmission tunnel and all that. So it was much easier to do. But though electric 4x4s, you're right, high percentage, it's mainly, I think, for crossovers, on-road.
Right.
I don't think it works as an off-road vehicle at all. So I think in terms of off-road, I think I can't imagine, going to an off-road event and finding too many 4x4 electrics over there.
Not yet, at least, Hormazd, because, interestingly, I was in the UK and we had a sort of sneak preview of the electric Range Rover. And it is so weird because you think that, of course, range is a limiting factor, but you do have a large battery. That's a large car. But apparently, and we've seen this, an electric 4x4 is more capable than an internal combustion for various reasons. One is instant torque switching. With an internal combustion system and, your mechanical systems, there is a fraction of a second between, sending the power to the four corners. Whereas with electric, it's instant. So almost as soon as, there is slippage, you can have power or torque sent there. And I was talking to the Range Rover engineer, the head of the project, and he said, look, most 4x4 guys would hate to hear this, but an electric is much easier and more capable off-road. He said, because we can get traction down. ESP intervention is lower. Because what happens in an internal combustion, you tend to brake a spinning wheel. He says, here we can adjust it with the torque before we need brake intervention. You've got...
Yeah, but Sergius, I'll be honest, I don't buy that because clearly there's a ground clearance issue and they're much heavier. Honestly, if you look at the offtake, if you look at, for me, the EQG, Mercedes EQG classic example is just not taken off. For these very reasons. I mean, a guy who buys an electric off-roader to go into the wilderness, he's definitely going to be worried about
range.
Where can I charge it at 15,000 feet? Or wherever. Today we've got fuel pumps at that height. Obviously, the ground clearance is a huge issue for a lot of them. So it might have that capability, but they're heavier also, which negates a lot of that capability. To be honest, I think one of the reasons why the Jimny is so phenomenal off-road is it's lightweight.
Light on its feet.
Yeah, it just kind of dances over obstacles, where heavier vehicles just get bogged down. So I think that is a challenge.
It is.
So for me, I think it's going to be very interesting and going to be a real asset test for Land Rover. I'm sure it'll be superbly engineered, but can it convince traditional 4x4 purists to go in for
electric
and electric? So that I think is a bigger challenge, so I'm sure they'll do some wizardry around the tech for reasons that you said. Everything's electronic, everything's instant,
Yeah, the traction. I mean, what they're claiming is essentially the benefits are the traction.
That's right.
The ability to switch between this and there was one more though also, which was very cheekily demonstrated to us. He said, with internal combustion, you have to put these rock sliders.
Yeah.
He said, our battery protection plate is a rock slider, a natural rock slider.
Right. Yeah.
But again, it is psychologically a little worry, when you hear that scraping sound.
That's right. But for me, a 2.5 ton or 3 ton SUV, which would probably sink down to its axles compared to, let's say, a Jimny, which is much lighter.
Right.
I don't know which one would get out. One super heavy with all the, let's say,
traction.
Exactly, electronic wizardry. So, yeah. So, I mean, I'm skeptical on EVs for hardcore off-roading.
Right.
I think they make a lot of sense as performance products on road, on tarmac, in the wet, all that sort of thing. And I think clearly maybe that's one reason why Mahindra also hasn't gone in for let's say, 4x4 on the EVs. One would thought they would have.
I was going to ask you that because it's something they own, as we just said.
Yeah, I think the B6 honestly is a good case for going 4x4.
Exactly. Yeah.
But again, there's a cost to it. They're selling well as is, so if it's selling well, why do it? But one could just imagine that, Mahindra should have 4x4. So maybe at some stage they will. I think and I know the vehicles are packaged for it because the earlier plan was to do it with Volkswagen.
Yeah.
The deal they had with them. Volkswagen would supply them with the motors and everything and 4x4 and it'd be phenomenally powerful. But obviously that didn't work out. It's a cost issue. Right now they're using a Valeo motor at the rear. So obviously that is there, but they've not seen the need right now. But again, it's really need versus image and identity. I mean, how important is the imagery around 4x4 to really drive the overall brand or that product in the eyes of the consumer. I mean, as I said, looking at a vehicle climbing up a sand dune looks great and you think, wow, even my vehicle, could do that. So I think it's that sort of, let's say, how do I say, communication, which is
the imagery that attracts.
The imagery that attracts, which really is the main value of 4x4 to a lot of the OEMs.
What was this one more sort of benefit to electric four-wheel drive systems, and that's actually using half of it. What I mean is e-axles, right? You can do an e-axle on, let's say, the front or the rear, and have internal combustion on the front. Hybrids, we've seen that Jeep has an e-axle as well. Internationally, we don't get it in India.
Yeah.
Tata, in fact, if they wanted it would be expensive, of course, I'm sure, but theoretically, they have all the ingredients right now. But do you see them going down that route, with, let's say, e-axle on the rear on the Sierra, which they have on the electric one, and then internal combustion on the front, or is it just too costly?
Yeah, see, one thing's clear, and we know that the 1.5 NA engine is set up for hybridization.
Right.
It's got the Atkinson cycle, not great as a pure NA, as very sluggish and underpowered.
Correct.
But as a hybrid, it could be different. I think it would be a complex thing, Sergius, as it is. Hybrids are not getting any GST benefit,
Right.
and their main focus will be to keep the costs down,
Right.
and eke out as much efficiency as they can out of it.
Right.
So I don't think a 4x4 would make sense, but you never know if they want to do some, again, like they've done with the pure EV, given a 4x4 option. And as you said, they've had a pretty good offtake. I mean, if it's anything more than 5%, I think is great.
Is good, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think e-axles are really feasible from a cost perspective with the high GST have of 40+%. Yeah.
Right. So then, I mean, if we are looking at, let's just move away from the four-wheel drive bit, but the hybrid Sierra, then what you're saying is going to be a two-wheel drive.
Yeah, I think that's my guess.
And Hormazd, before we conclude this podcast, there's one brand we have to talk about, which was strongly associated with all-wheel drive, and you had one, and that was the Renault Duster.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I think, honestly, I love that car, the all-wheel drive Duster. 1.5, that K9K engine, turbo was brilliant. And I think what I liked about the four-wheel drive really wasn't that it gave me more traction. The fact that the ride was even better. Because at the rear, it had an independent suspension.
Right.
Because to drive the rear wheels, you needed that, and the dead axle was gone. So the ride was absolutely phenomenal. You had the advantage and confidence of just hammering through slushy roads in the monsoon. And really, the kind of confidence that car gave was phenomenal. Again, sad that it's gone. Renault Duster back again, great product, but no diesel, no all-wheel drive capability. And, again, from an image point of view, that is a loss. So, again, that, of course, diesel is a separate story. I mean, it was predominantly diesel, and hardly anyone bought the AWD Duster. But again, those who had it, really loved it, and it had a certain kind of appeal to it. So, yeah, again, just to wrap up, four-wheel drive, clearly still very much a niche, and is really for hardcore enthusiasts who really want to go in for four-wheel drive, or if you are driving in very specific conditions up in the mountains where it does snow, where it does get, really slushy and slippery, or driving on really very slippery surfaces, that you should go in for a 4x4. Otherwise, 4x2 SUVs, they just do fine. And really from a manufacturer standpoint, I think 4x4 is all about creating that halo of capability, of tech, of engineering, and a car that can go anywhere. Well, hope you enjoyed watching this episode, and hope to see you again next week, same time. And to make sure you remember, do click on the bell icon. And also remember, you can catch all our podcasts on our other platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for watching.